Hello, Western Standard viewers. My name is Shaun Polczer, and we're coming at you today with something we like to call Business Standard, taking care of business, where we talk about some of the big issues and business stories of the day. So, after an extremely hectic week where we've had an election, we've had pronouncements from the premier, we've had a crash in oil prices, we've had just all kinds of things happening. And we're going to catch up today with Gurpreet Lail, who is the president and CEO of Enserva. For some of you folks that don't know, Enserva is the Energy Services Association of Canada. It was formerly PSAT, the Petroleum Services Association. Big in the community, huge backers of Stars Air Ambulance and other causes, among others. Anyway, Gurpreet is an advocate for Canadian energy, and she's been quite busy since the election in Washington, D.C., talking about tariffs, talking about the incoming government, some of the things that the new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is going to have to do to set things straight here in Alberta with not only the energy sector, but also Canada-U.S. relations. Stay tuned for that, because it turned out to be a really excellent interview, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy it. Last week, I also had the chance to attend the Canadian Hydrogen Conference in Edmonton, where I spoke with Nick Samain, who is the head of DMG Media Events, who not only did they put on the show, but they are going to be putting on the Global Oil and Gas Show here in Calgary. Don't know if they call it the Oil and Gas Show. I think they call it the Global Energy Show, GES. And that's coming up in June. And we're going to be taking a big part and a big role in that show with Nick. We've got all kinds of features planned for it. So stay tuned for that interview as well, which was admittedly pre-recorded in Edmonton. But we talk a little bit about hydrogen, some of the upcoming developments in alternative energies, entrepreneurs that are emerging in the space, and then kind of shifted over to what's going to be happening here in Calgary with what is admittedly the stampede of oil and gas. So while we're at it, we'd just like to ask you to join the conversation with us on westernstandard.news, on Facebook, on Twitter, on all your social media. You can make comments, chip in, or even better yet, become a member. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, and it's probably the best value in news that you're going to find out there. And I can tell you personally, as a former member of the mainstream media, longtime business reporter at the Calgary Herald, along with my colleagues here. You can't see them behind me. Dave was formerly at the Sun. Nigel was formerly at the Herald. But now we're bringing it to you live here from the Western Standard, because we really believe in what we do, and we really believe in the message, and we really think that everybody should be a part of it. So here we go. And I'm with Gurpreet Lail, the head of Enserva, which is the Energy Services Association of
Canada.
Yeah, here we are. I think last time we saw was at the oil show last year.
Yes.
And we're coming
back.
Yeah. So we've got a lot to catch up on.
Because the world hasn't been busy. The sector hasn't been busy. Not a lot to talk about.
I can't remember what I did last week. How long ago was this election?
Yeah, no kidding.
I think it was about a week ago, was it not?
Yeah. Are you talking about our election, the U.S. election? What election?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So prior to the election, and I think this is kind of how we got reacquainted, was you'd written an editorial about energy awareness ought to be on the ballot. So I'm just wondering, what were your thoughts about some of the results? What are your hopes and fears for energy awareness, and what do you think our new government needs to be focusing on?
So here's what I'll say. First, on energy awareness across Canada. I think there's little energy literacy outside of Western Canada.
Okay.
And whether that's in schools, whether that's with everyday population, people just don't know. And they don't know how energy is produced. They don't know how they get their energy,
right,
how it's traded, how it affects their livelihoods, like
how much it costs.
Exactly. And none of that actually translates into any form of literacy. So I wanted to make sure that, Canadians and Western Canadians were actually talking about energy and making sure that the rest of Canada understood, what does that mean? We're not this evil industry that everybody's painting us out to be.
Right.
But, we're doing some amazing work, and we're ensuring that your homes are heated you have AC in the wintertime or summertime, you've got food on the table because you can't have energy security without food security and vice versa. So like there has to be discussions like that at the dinner table with all families across Canada, not just Western Canada. And quite frankly, the prosperity that you see in Western Canada actually translates to economic certainty for the rest of Canada.
Sure.
And the great standard of living that we have here in Canada is a lot due to the energy sector. So we need to start elevating that message. And, you know, where the election results ended and what we're doing now with the election, it's been a tough slog for the last decade. Mm-hmm. The energy sector has been rolling a rock uphill, mm-hmm. and it's come back down, crashed on us, and we start all over again. But that's essentially what the mood was. So when the election results came in and, you know, we have another term of a Liberal government, there's a little bit of fear and like, now what? And do we all have the same amount of energy and rigor left in us after a decade of fighting to continue on this road if nothing changes? Now, we are hopeful that, you know, Prime Minister Carney comes in and is going to change course in terms of talking to energy and actually bringing us to the table and consulting with us and actually pushing some projects through that are dire for Canadians' GDP and our economic freedom and energy security for us, not just anybody else in the world, which we can also help with, but for Canadians.
Sure, absolutely. And I think he's committed to at least, I think, having a little bit of that dialogue.
Yeah, I think there's commitment there. I think in his...
More than we've seen.
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
Like we were saying before this show, it's a pretty low bar.
It's a low bar when you haven't seen anything. Like you've had one hurdle after another, and then all of a sudden someone gives you a little bit of inkling that there could be some change in dialogue. That means a lot when you're exhausted from this huge fight where we're not just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for the rest of Canada.
Sure.
You don't see rolling blackouts for no reason. Right. So unless Canadians are willing to give up some things and that are energy reliant, which we've seen through all the research and the graphs and the economic forecasts that Canadians are not. So then why do we keep bashing the industry that can provide food?
Sure. And you know, I would argue that sovereignty, you know, which was probably the big issue in the election, is one of those things. Because I don't think people in Eastern Canada are even aware that their oil comes down through the States and then it's back up through Superior, Wisconsin. Like it depends right now on a 5-kilometer stretch pipe that's being rebuilt by the Army Corps of Engineers.
Well, and that's where I think when it was Premier Doug Ford, when he came out and said, I'm shutting off power.
Shut off power.
And we were like, and it was interesting because to see that play out, like politically, we were in DC around that time and it was, you know, in DC, it was like, oh, Canada actually stood up for something, like just threatening us with something. I'm paraphrasing, but that's exactly what the mood was like.
I was in Houston.
Okay.
And that's what people were saying. It was like, you know, half of America just found out where it gets its electricity from.
Totally. And that was a piece. And you're like, but the same thing can happen on this side where, you know, President Trump can come out and have the same threat saying, hey, we're going to shut off energy coming out to Eastern Canada.
Sure.
Then what happens? And people don't realize that you're not getting direct oil or direct any form of energy from Alberta to Eastern Canada.
Right.
It goes down to the United States, then comes up and around.
Right. So you know, and national interest, I talked with Greg Ebel from Enbridge and, you know, and those were the kinds of things he was saying, like on energy. Like he compared, so it would have been easier to get them each like a cord. You know, them to get like Northern Gateway or to East through the thing, because it needs to be declared a national interest, right? Like these corridors, and that is an actual formal legal term.
Yeah.
Like that it's in the national interest, right? So that then they can work on building. You know, it strikes me though, like even if Carney were to do all these things tomorrow, that it's still going to take a certain amount of time. You know what I mean? It probably is going to take a term, I would think, before how
Not
can you get a
necessarily.
pipeline built?
I would say, I mean, so building new infrastructure, I don't think it would take a full term per se, but we have existing infrastructure that we can actually start pushing through, right? You look at phase 2 LNG and you're looking at
Right.
the Lism project. We have Indigenous engagement partnerships and there's capacity there. Like, yeah, they have to do some equipment reformation on there that could take 18 months, maybe max. But that's something that, you know, we can stop with the regulatory hurdles and say, yeah, we're pushing this through. And that creates jobs. That creates more economic freedom on both sides for companies, for Canadians, and for Indigenous engagement.
And I would almost argue that it would be better for bilateral relations if Canada were more independent and if we had a little more maybe to offer in terms of these kinds of discussions, and then also independence.
But we shouldn't overlook the fact that the United States is going to be our number one ally and customer. Like, full stop, right? Like, there's this rhetoric out there that we can just go to Europe and survive and not do trade with the United States. There is no good outcome out of that for Canadians. Like, we have to get back to the table and bridge that relationship with the US because we're so interdependent with one another.
Well, yes, and especially in energy.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that even President Trump fails to grasp, the total enormity of, like, yeah, you got a lot of oil in Alaska, but it still has to come down.
Exactly. And I think he's starting, I mean, I shouldn't be talking about President Trump, but from what we've heard around his advisors and just being in DC is that everybody around him understands.
Yeah.
And, it's just a matter of that sinking in to other pockets and to President Trump himself. But everybody gets it. Business gets it. Senators get it. Congressmen get it. Like, everybody understands how integral energy is North America. It's not just unleashing American energy. They're going to need Canadian.
Well, of course.
Sure. At the end of the day. And that's not just on actual product. That's on
services.
Services, like our human capital. We're crews that go back and forth consistently. We've got equipment that goes back and forth. We have product that gets manufactured here, built there, back, or vice versa. Manufactured there, comes here, we build it up, and then we ship it out to whether it's Alaska or other designations. It is very intricate on all forms of equipment, manufacturing, even chemicals.
Sure.
Like, all facets of
so how do tariffs affect that then? Like, if I'm a Canadian company, like, I worked briefly for Packers Plus. They've got a big manufacturing thing down in Houston, and they're doing a lot of cross-border work, precision. It seems to me, big drilling companies, well testing. I have another buddy who's a well tester, and they do stuff in the Bakken in Manitoba as well as. So how does that work with the tariffs? Like, if you're a Canadian company and you're performing those kind of services in the U.S., like, would you be subject to those tariffs?
So you're subject on. We have more of a threat to business on the Canadian retaliatory tariffs, than we do on the U.S. So the retaliatory tariffs actually tariff product that we can't. Some of the product we can't actually get in Canada.
Sure.
So a prime example of that is sand used for pressure pumping.
Okay. You wouldn't think sand.
You wouldn't think sand, right? But sand showed up on the list. And we were like, why is sand on the list? And then not only was it on the list, it was mixed in this big, huge bucket of everything sand. So sand used for blasting paint off, sand used for building bottles, like, it's in the same category, which we couldn't understand. So, in talking to Finance Canada and talking to Natural Resource Canada, it was like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. It's categorized into this bucket. And we were like, well, if you look at the amount of money that our companies spend on getting sand from Wisconsin, because that's where we're procuring it from, there's no viable Canadian solution currently today. They're working on it.
It's got to be like milled, and it's got to be clean, and it's got to be.
And we don't even have like tonnage
to some spec.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, but if you can't source it in Canada, why are you tariffing us? Your retaliatory tariffs were supposed to be in quotations, to harm not harm, but provide some angst to the American population.
Right. And they were supposed to be targeted.
Exactly.
Right.
So you're not targeting American companies, you're targeting Canadians. And you're targeting service companies right now, where we're just trying to make sure people have jobs and we're actually getting work done.
Well, our productivity, right?
Yeah.
That's our productivity.
That was the other piece. We're like, so do you understand how energy is extracted? And like, that's how granular we had to get to explain why this is important. At the end of the day, we went through a remission process, and we're still going through it with the feds. But it's what people need to understand is the retaliatory tariffs are not, from our industry's point of view, are not hurting American companies, they're hurting us.
Right. Because everybody seems to think it's, they talk about the export tax on oil, but yeah, like you said, like components and parts and on rigs and
like coil tubing,
equipment, tubing.
There's like specialized, exactly. There's specialized equipment that we only get from the United States because of the quality that we get from the United States. Some of the stuff you can get from China or somewhere else, but then the quality is not there.
Right.
And, if we're on this whole thing around making sure that we are responsibly produced, that human rights actually matter.
Right.
And, the social license to operate, if that actually matters, why would you be pushing Canadian companies into non-democratic countries to do trade?
Sure.
Like, that makes no sense.
Like, yeah. Well, and that apparently was the rationale at one point, was free and transparent trade. Fair trade, right?
Yeah. It's no longer fair trade on
because people mess with their currencies and they play all these games with, like you said, sales taxes, duties and imports.
Well, just look at what happens in the markets the minute tariffs get announced from the United States, right? Like it's just volatility that nobody needs right now.
Yeah, and uncertainty is the big enemy, right?
Exactly. And when you're on this side of the border and you hear statements made on the other side of the border, it's drill, baby, drill. It doesn't actually translate down to business where it's drill, baby, drill, right? Like you actually have to take into account what the pricing is. Are people actually going to invest in more production? Are rigs going to be working? Is there going to be drilling activity? What does that look like? That all goes down. Exactly. So there is no, everybody's talking about, the United States is like drill, baby, drill. No, that's a tagline. But that's not actually coming out on the other side and as actual proof that there's actually more activity taking place. Matter of fact, most people are projecting to be having less activity than they did even last year.
Sure. Yeah, well, it only stands to reason, right?
Yeah.
Like if you got X amount of inflation, I was doing a story today. It was basically on the oil price and the provincial budget, right? Because $750 million sensitivities on every dollar up or down on WTI, but then every dollar on the differential is, $590 million or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So, and then tossing currency and everything else, and it's a very complex thing.
It's super complex. So even you look at Prime Minister Carney's, what he's projecting is going to be debt. It's a huge number. But is he gonna, what I'm going to be curious to see, and we're going to be pushing for that for our members, is that are you going to go into $150 million debt for what? Are you going to invest in energy projects that will actually result in higher GDP, more jobs for Canadians? Or are you going to invest in something that, you're just servicing more debt onto debt? It's not creating new jobs. It's not putting back into the GDP. It's not helping secure Canada for energy, which then also doesn't secure Canada for food security. So what's the deal here? And that's where I think it's the pedal's going to hit the road. Metal's going to hit the road is what are you actually going to utilize? And what are you going to put the money towards and call it as debt that can actually bring money back? Or are you just doing it to...
Right, because there's good debt, there's bad debt, right?
Exactly.
Credit card debt's bad. Mortgage debt, if you're building a house and paying down a house, having a family and all that kind of thing, that's good debt.
That's good debt. I'm a fiscal conservative through and through. Debt is not in my vocabulary in terms of, oh, let's just print money.
Right.
But at the end of the day, if you were going to tell us that you were going to increase our debt, then also tell us, great, what is that going to do? Is the increase in debt going to actually provide an avenue for us to put back to our GDP? Is it going to create jobs for Canadians, secure our energy, secure food security for Canadians, sovereignty, or what?
Right.
Are you just putting debt at good debt after bad debt? Like what's happening here?
Backing up like we've been doing for the last 10, 15 years.
Exactly. So like nobody wants any of that anymore. And what projects are you going to do? Like we always talk about the environment, but nobody talks about the fact of the strides that we've made in this sector on the environment and where we are today.
Sure.
And how can we actually help the rest of the world with their emissions and their environmental reporting,
right,
with our product?
Export those standards.
Exactly. But no one's talking about that. It's like, oh, well, we have to do this for the environment.
So how does Enserva fit in this? So when I started at the Daily Oil Bulletin, like way back in the day, and it was PSAC.
Yeah.
And the stars was always a big thing that you guys did, and I noticed that you mentioned it. So like over the years, how has the role, energy services it's kind of like the edge of the wedge in the oil patch, right? It's like the leading edge of technology and innovation and driving down costs, like you said, productivity, right? More meters for less money drilled, and all those things. So how has your role evolved? Like, is it more advocacy now? Is it?
So I think when we rebranded with Enserva, it was actually purposeful in terms of encompassing all of our members. And before 40 plus years ago, when PSAC first started, it was strictly for oil and gas.
Right.
And we're the service side.
Roger.
Yeah, Roger Susie. And it was, we need our own voice, which is fantastic. And, we got to 40 years. And then it was time to rebrand and freshen up the association to also talk about, okay, we're the supply chain for energy below ground, above ground, and in the air. It's still our members that actually come up with the technology and innovation and testing of it all to make all of this happen. And honestly, I just didn't want another acronym, and I didn't want to go from PSAC to ESAC. I was like, nothing SAC. So we came up with Enserva. So we're in service of our members, and we're the Energy Service Association. And where we've evolved to today is we do a lot more advocacy on behalf of the service sector, the manufacturing sector. And we, make sure our voice, as little as it is, it's loud and it's heard. And we're also doing it across North America. Like, this is where I want to make sure that everybody collaborates, that the Canadian energy message has to be heard collectively, whether you're in Canada or in the United States. We're not segregating any messaging here. Energy is required. We need to have a secure energy infrastructure within Canada to help the rest of the world. And that's where Enserva plays a huge role in that. And then we also give back. So our members and the whole industry actually comes and supports STARS in our Stars and Spurs Gala.
Yep.
And, as tough as times have been, like even this year, our members are not posting record profits by any means, but we came out and we raised the most amount of money we've ever raised. And that was $1.7 million to go back to STARS. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Gurpreet. Thanks for coming in, and thanks for telling your story. And it's a great chat.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. I'm here with Nick Samain, head of DMG. Was it just DMG?
DMG events.
DMG events, and we're here in Edmonton, and for the beautiful River Valley. It's actually kind of a nice day.
Yeah,
for a change.
It's a beautiful day, Shaun, and nice to catch up here in Edmonton. It's I think spring is upon us, but I won't jinx the weather as we're having a trade show. And we do like to have some nice weather for the many thousands of delegates that are joining us here in Edmonton.
About how many are here at the Hydrogen Convention?
We expect between 8,000 to 10,000 people coming here from across the region here in Edmonton, from across the energy sector, from across the province, and we're well represented provincially, in particular from the prairies through to Ontario, right through to Atlantic Canada. And then in addition, as you may have seen, there's a number of international pavilions here on the show floor from all around the world, and delegations here. So it's really got an international flavor to the convention this year, which is great to see.
Excellent. So why Edmonton?
Yeah, Edmonton, when we originally launched the event, we're in our fourth year, was just some of the amazing momentum that was happening here in the region. You've got two things, the launch of the Greater Edmonton Region Hydrogen Hub, which at that time was really gaining some momentum. And what we do at DMG is we look at markets like that. There are some amazing independent conferences, but we look at see how we can really bring that together into one major convention, which has the opportunity to get that scale, which will start to attract cross Canada and international participation and really drive some of those things that are going to be key to growing the economy, such as international investment, in things like new projects, opportunities for opening up new markets, for export of our energy here, and lots of other reasons. I mean, one of the ones that I'm most passionate about is just talking about hydrogen and what that means to the everyday consumer and the everyday citizen here in Alberta, because like a lot of new energy, there's just so many questions around that. What can it do? Is it affordable?
Right.
Who's using it? And where does that fit in with the larger energy mix?
Right. I was talking with Premier Smith from Korea. She's in Asia right now, and she's talking exactly those kinds of things about markets and uses. And she said to me that filling stations are starting to pop up all over Korea, and that there's a really huge appetite, and that this could be Alberta's next $1 trillion industry.
There's so much upside, and to build on what the Premier was mentioning with the advent of more filling stations, and a lot of folks talk about hydrogen in the kind of the chicken and the egg, that you've got to be able to produce it and produce it in a cost-effective manner. There's lots of different conversations about that here at the conference, but it's the demand economy. And filling stations like that, that the Premier was showcasing in Korea, that's really bleeding to that consumption economy. And that's the big theme of the 2025 convention here this year, is really unlocking that consumption end of hydrogen. One of those really important sides of those is for consumers themselves to power their own vehicles or businesses, and all sorts of other applications like that.
Because it's mostly been industrial.
A lot of industrial, that's right. Certainly through opportunities to decarbonize things such as aggregates, manufacturing, steel, agriculture. We know that when it comes to shipping, port operations, there's so many applications globally. Companies like Amazon, when we think of warehouses and the tens of thousands of material handling equipment and forklifts and things like that, the applications are really coming to fruition now, where they're being used not just as for a first-time trial, but expanded. Look, right here in the Edmonton region, we're seeing things like our first hydrogen home.
Yes.
That's been covered quite well in the media as well, so that's exciting. Yesterday here, we had a delegation visiting the CP Rail not first hydrogen. There's a couple of them, but hydrogen locomotives.
Yep.
So we're really starting to see those, and it's really, really exciting for this community that's gathered here today to talk about what's next and how do we continue doing the right things in government and private industry, that right mix of international investments and local support to ensure that we continue this exciting growth trajectory.
That's one thing that struck me is, like you're saying, the independent business. Like this really seems to be a grassroots momentum, coming up, and Edmonton is kind of a place to do it, because it's like you said, it's got the industry and it's got a lot of these interested and the government, smaller players. But this show is really a precursor to the energy show in Calgary.
This is for DMG, this is our first big convention of the year. And yes, we are looking forward to the Global Energy Show Canada coming up June 10th to 12th in Calgary, which does have a segment of hydrogen as part of that. But that event, wow, Shaun, I mean, that is the entire 360 spectrum of energy that's coming together. Canada's national energy events, and it's the excitement is clearly building in the market there with so much going on right now. Whether that's in the day-to-day news that we sit down and follow, international and domestic politics and potential for policy.
Sure.
And really driving the core of that on that show, which is The Conversation, which is being hosted by Peter Mansbridge. But you can expect all of those issues and many more to be on the table, because the big, some say crossroads, I'll say question is, what is our direction as a country going to look like over the next 5 years? And what's our opportunity to really build out Canada's energy vision together? And the show will attempt to answer some of those questions, to have the industry themselves come forward and put that on the table. And that's going to be very powerful, we think, at the right time in June. Just post-election,
yes.
With some important findings that will ideally land on the desks of those policymakers to say, here's some things we should look at as far as strengthening not just our energy infrastructure, but things that lead to those bigger questions that Canadians are talking about coast to coast, sovereignty and strengthening our economy, and Canada's energy opportunity.
I was just going to mention that. I like what you said about it being at a crossroads.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes at a pretty good time, because we've got some LNG Canada, we've got the Trans Mountain expansion. So even though I would say that we're maybe a little bit late to the party here, it's at an inflection point where we could really take it. It could be a blessing in disguise.
Well, yeah. Some of the, I think it's there's energy and there's other resources here. We know that we are blessed here as a country with an abundance of resources. We know that there's a global market, that's looking to buy those resources. And so I think a lot of the focus now is, how do we build those cost-effective modes of distribution, such as you mentioned, like LNG Canada or more pipelines.
Right.
How do we move our energy up across the country, being such a magnificent, large country? We've got, of course, many of our energy resources here in Alberta. We want to get those to markets in Canada, which are utilizing resources in many cases at a higher cost.
Sure.
Or importing from other jurisdictions where we could be providing Canadian investment and jobs right here for our sector,
and helping them reduce their own emissions through technology and cleaner sources of energy.
That alone is Canada's LNG opportunity to displace emissions in other parts of the world. It's a very exciting time, and back to the global energy show in June in Calgary. That's I think that's first order that's on the table, that we'll be talking about. And that's what's driving, I think, our best conference program and highest caliber speakers that we've seen at that event in more than a decade.
Sure. Last year was pretty tough to top.
Thank you.
With the Saudis.
Yeah,
everybody kind of came to the table.
Yeah. We have a record, as I mentioned, perhaps a record number of international pavilions, but speakers from around the world, and alongside major CEOs and policymakers. More speaker announcements to come, as we do in our exhibitions, and some big ones over the next 7 weeks as we lead into the Global Energy Show.
Excellent. And as you were saying too, as we were talking, it's not just oil and gas. You're saying there's going to be a big nuclear component this year.
Yeah, the event is strong, has a strong representation from oil and gas, from major producers on the exhibition floor, and such an incredible industry represented there, strongly supported by all the major associations in oil and gas as well. But in addition to that, nuclear has become a big part of the event. Both delegates attending the show can expect to meet nuclear companies from Korea, who's come in with a Korean Nuclear Association, companies like Westinghouse speaking. You've got X Energy, you've got Terrestrial Energy. So you've got a really strong representation there. And in addition to that, one of the conferences taking place is the Energy Influencers Conference. New energy is a growing part of the event, and that does encompass renewables, but you're also looking at there's lots of companies in the geothermal space, which has been making quite a bit of news lately, especially here in Alberta, and others. So it's really has that full spectrum, and when you walk through the exhibition floor, we sometimes tend to think of them as kind of separate, right? Oil and gas to do, right. But you get those sectors in a room, that alone, there's a tremendous amount of industry collaboration, investment, and otherwise, because in the end, it's all about how do we create energy that's affordable, that's secure, that's accessible, both here in Canada, and then our energy that we can export to many parts of the world that don't have, some have none of those things in their energy mix. And we have that opportunity here in Canada to provide. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and adding value, right?
Yeah.
It's about opposition.
That's it.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaun, for coming here to the Canadian Hydrogen Convention. And please enjoy the next 2 days. It's going to be a busy one.
Well, it's been an education for me, being an old oil and gas guy, and just seeing how it evolves and changes.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.